Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hi everyone, today I'm joined by Nuno Teodoro, the cybersecurity officer of Huawei. Nuno joined the company in February this year, and prior to that, he was the global CISO at Trufo, and he also held information security and data privacy roles at Vodafone and Allianz Group. I'm delighted to welcome him to the show to discuss his work, his views on human layer security, and hear all of his stories. Nuno, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
To start things off, you recently joined Huawei as its security leader. I'm curious, what drew you to the role?
Yeah, exactly. So I've been in the company since February this year, so fairly recent to a company of the size of Huawei. So this is a company that has almost 200,000 employees and it's represented across 170 countries. So I would say that the challenge that I saw to move myself to this role was being on a supplier side in one of the biggest technology companies in the world, and that is innovating in so many fronts in the consumer and the enterprise side. So that would be that was one of the biggest reasons for me to change, and also, of course, being a company that is highly scrutinized in terms of cybersecurity, and myself being the cybersecurity professional, that just represented a big challenge for myself. And professionally, I'm very motivated by this kind of challenges. So it seemed the right fit at the right time for my professional career.
Could you maybe tell us a bit more about some of those challenges that you've faced so far?
Yes, so there are several challenges in companies of this size, but additional challenges of companies of this size that come from China. So big companies usually take a long time to steer, and this is certainly a big challenge in terms of cybersecurity and to adapt to a market and to an ecosystem that is changing constantly. Aside from that, of course, there are challenges on the geopolitical tensions, where the company security and trust is challenged on a daily basis due to the country of origin. This creates a huge challenge for the cybersecurity leaders in Huawei, and for myself personally, it's very rewarding to work in a company where we can see day after day the fulfillment of cybersecurity and privacy controls, and the challenge that we are placed regarding the source or the country of origin of the company. It doesn't match with one with the other. So that represents an additional, let's say, effort that cybersecurity leaders need to do in Huawei to really make it clear and to make it transparent on the cybersecurity controls that we put in our equipment, in our products for the end user in general, and for the companies that use our products. So in the end of the day, we have twice or three times the work in trying to demonstrate openly and with transparency that the cybersecurity is a core part of Huawei business, and the country of origin of the company has nothing to do with the security or the trust that our equipment, our personnel, the employees, and our services have when we offer this to the consumer and to the enterprise in general.
Are you able to maybe talk about some of the ways in which you're, working to foster that trust or create that trust?
Yeah, of course. I can give you a very clear example. Well, a couple of them. The first one is the cybersecurity transparency centers that Huawei built. So we have several transparency centers across the world, and what we want to achieve with that, in a nutshell, is to give the ability of customers to go there to inspect our source code, to see the supply chain security, to see the potential flaws that they want to identify in the source code or the equipment, and to be very open and transparent with that. So we are not afraid of being audited, of being inspected. We have actually created these centers to allow customers to go there, even with their own auditing companies, independent ones, or regulators or governments, to go to these centers and to audit us, to inspect to the lowest level of source code what we are producing and what we are delivering to the customers and to the government.
Thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned Huawei has almost 200,000 employees and millions of end users across almost 170 countries. From your perspective, what role do people play in security at Huawei?
One of the most critical roles that we can have. We make the effort of putting cybersecurity as a priority and a requirement for every business unit inside the company. So to give you a perspective on this, my role as a cybersecurity officer is to work on having the fulfillment of local or international cybersecurity requirements, legal requirements on cybersecurity, regulatory requirements on privacy, and put those requirements together into our products, into the design of our products and services, and basically make sure that we fulfill with everything. So it's not just a matter of we think we are doing things in a proper way. We do have a very critical team in terms of approaching the cybersecurity and privacy requirements that we put into the design of our products and services. And for each one of the business units inside Huawei, there is a cybersecurity risk owner for each one of them. So it's not only the cybersecurity team that takes care of cybersecurity. The marketing team has cybersecurity requirements and objectives. The public communications team, they have cybersecurity requirements and objectives. The product team, they have cybersecurity requirements and objectives. Everyone from HR, procurement, legal have cybersecurity mandatory requirements and objectives. And this is something that is enforced from the top level of the company. It's not something that comes only from the security team, it comes from the CEO itself. So Huawei is a company that really strives for having cybersecurity embedded into all the business units inside the company. So everyone, and taking that to your initial question, 200,000 people in Huawei working. Probably not all the 200,000 are reaching the same level of requirements in terms of cybersecurity, but everyone is a part of the ecosystem that takes cybersecurity and privacy to the most to the highest requirement in terms of need of the company.
I'm curious, with that many employees, and you've spoken about employees not just in the security team, but in the marketing team and in so many other teams. How do you take people on the journey? How do you get everybody to feel bought into this responsibility for security?
So we do have several governance forums, and we have a lot of internal actions to put everyone up to speed in terms of cybersecurity and privacy. We have, let me give you an example, Cybersecurity and Privacy Committee, which basically holds a meeting that puts all the business units together on a country level and then on a region level and on a global level to make sure that everyone understands the requirements of the legislation, everyone understands the requirements internally of Huawei in terms of cybersecurity and privacy, everyone understands the customer requirements regarding cybersecurity and privacy. And we cascade this to all the business units, to all the account directors, to everyone inside the company to make sure that the message is passed through, and they cascade down to their own teams. So this starts on a governance committee meeting, and then it's cascaded down to the entire team within Huawei. And this starts on a local level, to the regional level, to the global level of the company, to make sure that everyone is articulated with the same requirements and with the same decisions on a security level from the company side.
Let's talk about trust. You mentioned in an article that you wrote recently that there's nothing such as trust in the current digital world. I'm curious, what did you mean by that?
So what I want to say with that is that trust is the number one thing in the digital world right now. If you think about anything that is digital, if you do not trust that digital environment, you will probably don't want to use it. You will be a bit constrained about using that digital ecosystem. And if you scale this to a company like Huawei and to an ecosystem where we provide probably most of the technology in terms of telecommunications, trust is the number one thing that we need to have internally, externally, and to demonstrate to everyone. So when I say there is nothing such as trust in the current digital world, is that trust should not be something that we assume it exists. It should be created, it should be demonstrated, and it should be connected to what we call a zero trust approach in the organization, especially because when we leverage concepts such as zero trust approach in organizations, we are now able to adapt to a constantly evolving threat landscape. And we are now able to consider the current cybersecurity paradigms of unknown insider and outsider malicious agents. And those agents that can disrupt operations and services, even in a nationwide level, are a bit more manageable if we do implement these zero trust approaches. So when I say there is nothing such as trust, is exactly do not assume that trust exists by default, but do create the mechanisms to enforce trust and to demonstrate and verify that trust does exist.
No, I agree. I think that's so important. I want to backtrack slightly. You mentioned the concept of zero trust, which is something different, I think, to what you were initially speaking about, which is the importance of an organization building trust with its customers, its employees, and earning that. Maybe we could talk a little bit about zero trust. So why is zero trust so important to organizations?
Sure, that's exactly spot on. I would say that zero trust is important to organizations because it allows us to implement a model where we already assume by default that a breach or an incident has already occurred or will certainly occur. And then it makes the organizations to constantly enforce more fine-tuned risk management approaches, where the goal is to take the probability factor to a near zero value in terms of risk. So if we think about trust, why should you trust something even if it's your internal or external ecosystem in the digital world of today? People with a security background know and have seen many times that trust can be deceiving. So we can pretty much make things appear differently of what they are. So by applying a zero trust model, we are able to really understand and make a decision on what we should trust and what we should do with internal and external agents. You will never fully trust a connection that is reaching your data center just because it says it comes from a trustworthy asset. You should never trust that someone will access a server and they will behave properly because they are an employee of the company. You should never trust as a customer that a supplier is putting an appliance inside your network and the appliance will do only what it's supposed to do and nothing else, just because the supplier has a very good reputation. And on the opposite, you should not trust a supplier just because it doesn't have a very good reputation. Trust and zero trust paradigms should be the paramount of today's digital world. And that's why in Huawei, and not only Huawei, but Huawei, we do implement what we call the ABC, which is the assume nothing, believe nobody, and check everything, which is our zero trust approach within the company. And we do have strict policies with regards to the execution of any action. And we do believe that trust needs to be based on facts. Facts must be verifiable, and verification must be based on common standards. And that's why Huawei believes that this is an important model for building trust in the digital era.
Yeah, and it seems like trust is, again, just so core to the company and the mission. It's interesting to talk about these concepts of trust from the kind of consumer perspective, and then trust from the internal perspective of the security team. What is your philosophy here? What are you saying to people? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that, trust needs to be earned, and everybody has a responsibility, whether it's a consumer, choosing to buy a product, or whether it's a security team that are evaluating an event or an incident. You're saying you've got to do the work. You've actually got to, you can't just take things at face value and default trust them. And if that's the case, what advice do you have for people? What should they be thinking about in terms of how they verify whether they can actually trust something or not?
I think that's a very good and difficult question. So thank you for that. The problem is that trust is something that usually is more psychological than anything else. Of course, you do have facts. You do have the capability to check and to inspect something that will probably bind your trust to some principles. But in the end of the day, trust for the consumer side, it's something that it's by default associated to a preconceived idea that they have of something. So when assessing trust towards an equipment, a company, a wearable, something that is going to be bought by a supplier, well, I think it depends on the maturity of the consumer itself. But if you see in the news a lot of data breaches of that company, a lot of incidents of that company doesn't have people in charge of cybersecurity, then probably nowadays you won't trust much into the outputs of that company in terms of security and privacy.
And this is where I was going to go next. So I think we've spoken about this throughout the podcast today and our conversation, but questions around trust and Huawei dominate the news right now. Mm-hmm. In response to this, you recently blogged and said that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, as we call it sometimes in the security space, is now one of the biggest geopolitical warfare weapons and the number one strategy against Huawei. Could you explain a little bit more about this?
Yeah, of course. So, like you said, and very well, FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And if you have those three words isolated, you'll have, in a very simplistic way, three of the most unwanted feelings a human being wants to have towards something. And this is exactly what I wrote in my article. If you put security to the table in a transparent and verifiable way, you'll be able to minimize the FUD because you are giving hard evidence that the reality is exactly the opposite. And you can see throughout the news on several countries around the world that Huawei is seen as a potential issue to national security, and is seen as a potential high-risk supplier, is seen as a potential source of something that is not good in terms of security related with the equipment and the service that we provide. And you need to think, why is that? Is there any evidence that we had a big cybersecurity incident? No. Is there any evidence of data breaches? No. Is there any evidence in terms of are we actually listening to conversations? Are we having illegitimate access to data? Are we doing something wrong in terms of what we do with our equipment and services? And the answer is always no. And that's why one of the big efforts that Huawei is putting, it's precisely with what I said in the beginning of our podcast, which is the building of trust through inspection and auditability, hence the cybersecurity transparency centers. Okay, if you say that we do have those issues, or if you think that we pose security to national threat to national security, then come to the laboratories, bring your own teams, audit the source code, inspect the packet flows, assess whatever you want to assess in terms of security and privacy, and take your own conclusions. And this is why we do believe that trust needs to be based in evidence. It needs to be verifiable. And this is what we try to do in a very simplistic way. And on a more personal side, I am a cybersecurity professional. I have been working in the cybersecurity field pretty much my entire professional life. So one of the things that I have seen in Huawei is that security and privacy is really taken seriously inside the company. Every day we do have to report security and privacy requirements. We do have to obey by the law in each country. We are pressured every day to make things better, more secure, and to have privacy on the top of the list, because customer data is always on the front row in terms of priorities. And this is something that's really, really visible in the company. So I do believe that fear, uncertainty, and doubt is being used as a weapon against a company such as Huawei, simply because the country of origin of Huawei is China. This is as simple as it gets.
And we often see FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt, used in security, usually to try and get people to take security seriously, or get them to take certain actions in security. How do you think the narrative around FUD and security can change? Do you think it ever will change?
Well, I don't think so. I think these two concepts will exist hand in hand forever. You will always have organizations, people, governments, states, whatever, using FUD towards something with a certain goal in mind. And you will always have security that needs to be implemented, challenged, demonstrated in order to eradicate that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So those two paradigms will never cease to exist, and they will always go hand in hand, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's such a big challenge, and we've covered previously on this podcast about how fear appeals are so ineffective when trying to get people to change behavior in security. But we've got a long way to go. And we saw this play out, and this is maybe not specifically related to cybersecurity, but more national security. But there was a lot of fear and uncertainty around 5G. Certainly last year, there was some, what I think of as complete misinformation around the link between 5G and, the pandemic. But what work is being done behind the scenes at Huawei to try and address these fears? And I think specifically, we live in an age where there's so much information available on the internet, and it's very hard to, it's really hard to get people to sometimes believe the truth or follow the truth. So maybe tell me a bit about the work that's going on there, the challenges again that are there to overcome, and what you see happening in the future with regard to this kind of misinformation.
Sure, that's a very good one, especially because, as you know, we have seen pretty much every day news or people commenting and relating 5G, the vaccines, and pandemic, and that they are going to be monitored and traced because of that. To be really honest, I almost cannot say this without laughing, because I don't know how this concept of 5G is going to be used in such a harmful way in society. I don't know where this comes from. If people really know what 5G is all about, it's about enabling societies, making societies more proactive in terms of development, enhancing the capabilities they have to do a lot more for the citizens that they do today. So it's really a misconception from the human side that I really don't know the origin, but I would like to understand a bit more and to study a bit more in terms of origin and epicenter of this theory. So at Huawei, what we try to do is to collaborate with governments, with the Commission, with stakeholders in various spectrum, and try to support the development of security ecosystems around 5G, and of course with the cooperation of everyone. This will be achieved. The European Cybersecurity Certification Group, the NIS Cooperation Group, the 5G standardization, and all the stakeholders associated with these activities are being, of course, a big part of what Huawei is doing, is collaborating with and is monitoring. And why? Because it's very simple. We do want this technology to be a secure technology. We do want to make the 5G ecosystem secure. We are not afraid of assessing what we are doing in terms of 5G. We do want to collaborate, and as a result, we do want that the understanding of the impact of 5G threats is defined, and in a coordinated risk management approach, 5G networks are created in the most secure possible way. So the major telecom equipment providers where Huawei is support, for instance, in this case, the European Union to raise 5G security evaluation and certification standards, strengthening the EU role and national authorities with open and transparent supervision. So it is only by creating this fairness and transparency among the 5G suppliers that the world will fully benefit of these technologies.
Today, we've spoken a lot about Huawei and 5G. These are two huge topics, and I think two huge topics that come under a lot of scrutiny from the public, from people asking a lot of questions again about trust. But really, I think the underlying message here from you is that this applies to every single company and every single technology. In 2021 and beyond, you have to be working to earn trust and verify trust in our organizations. What principles and philosophies do you think security teams should be taking forward with regard to trust? What role and responsibility do security professionals have in creating and sustaining that trust for their organization and also with their employees?
So security professionals need to understand that this is no longer a security silo inside the companies, and we do need to work as a business enabler inside the company, and we need to understand the overall requirements from everyone that will use the services or the products of our company. So I would say that one of the first or critical things that a security professional inside the company needs to do is understand the business risks that are associated with what the company is doing and be an enabler of business. I also believe that security professionals should have a pretty solid technical background to understand everything from a bit level, and strong soft skills to be able to present from the engineering level to the board level and act as a middleware between both, because most times there's a lack of communication and understanding between the two parties. So pretty much a middleware that fully understands business, that knows how to communicate, that acts as an enabler of the business towards a better and more secure ecosystem.
That's great. Nuno, thank you so much for your time today and joining us on the podcast. We like to finish up every one of our shows with some rapid fire questions to get to know the humans on the Human Layer Security podcast a little bit better. So I wanted to start with, what's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I ever received. So I would say that there's one in particular that came from a very good friend of mine, Alexander Medarov. He's the CEO and CISO of Digital 8, and he's a former colleague of mine in Allianz, a former information security officer. And the advice is pretty simple. Don't jump to a fire to save yourself from another fire. And if he's listening to this, he will know that he told me this in what we call the 666 room.
I'm intrigued. My next question is, if everything in your diary has been cleared, how do you spend the day?
Okay, so I won't lie that CISOs or cybersecurity leaders pretty much don't have the diary cleared. But if we do, I do try to get the best balance between spending time with my family, especially my daughter, to exercise and keep a healthy mind and body, and to read. I like to read a lot. And of course, I won't lie that sometimes a good time in front of Netflix, it's mind-saving. Usually we are always on call, and sometimes those clear brain moments in front of the TV are really, really mandatory.
And you've teed me up perfectly for my third question, which is, what's the best book you've read?
This one is a hard one because I really like to read, and I probably have a flaw in my reading journey, which is I pretty much only read things from my area, my professional area. But I would say that one of the best books I've read was Ghost in the Wires by Kevin Mitnick. But I could throw you a second one, which is the Cyber Effect, which is related with cyber psychologist from Mary Aiken. Those two I would highly recommend.
That's great, and we'll add links to those in the show notes. Nuno, thank you again. It's been great to have you with us today. Thanks for sharing all of these lessons, all of these thoughts, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.